All right, after a lengthy delay, we are back at it with Alteryx. So please make sure you are logged into the Alteryx site and you are ready to bring it up. Just as a reminder, we're not going to be doing any importing today, though you will be doing importing in the future for future assignments. Just as a brief reminder, if you need to import anything other than a comma-separated value file or a data file, then basically, or sorry, an Excel file, then you go to data to actually do some importing here. But we don't really need to go to there. You can kind of see that I've got some files that I've listed that I've imported as my preparation, and so you go to import data. Today, all we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding to what we already have. So I'm going to go ahead and go launch my designer class. You probably won't have all that many files up there, but I have got a boatload of files. So you can kind of see I've got a whole bunch of people's files up here. I need to get to my file. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be filtering out, going to my workflows owned by me, which fortunately I created this workflow just earlier today. So I knew it was going to come up pretty quickly. So this is your workflow that you created from last class period, or from last class period, from, I guess, from your assignment. And one of the very first things we're going to have to do is we're going to check this data, because we are going to be adding on to this detail. So we need to make sure it's correct. And I told you that the whole purpose of the cleaning and validation process was to achieve this point. And my hope is, sincere hope, is that everybody did exactly what I told them to in the instructions. And we're at the point where I need to be right here. But in order to be able to confirm that, we need to know not only that our validation totals check out, we're at where we need to be, but we also need to check our source files to make sure that those source files are correct as well. So let's go ahead and let's check, first of all, our data, make sure that our validation totals check out. So we're going to click on this first summarization, and you should have your summarized information down at the bottom. You should have 34 records with a sum of employee ID of 91651. All right, and again, that was in the validation total, so you should be straight up on that, because that one was one that was given to you. All this is information is given to you, but I want to confirm all of it. Then we're going to go down to restaurant information and click on that. That's 33 records. Some of the restaurant number should be 1683. And then finally, we want to check our transaction file. So this is going to be the purchases. So let's go to the count the sum amount. And remember, that one was weird. And it's 315 records with a amount of about $27,769.81. And you probably have a big leading decimal or trailing decimal for several places. The reason for that is I created all these files in Excel, and I did some mathematical adjustments using formulas in Excel, and so it didn't round properly to the exact decimal, even though I did the round function. So I didn't even realize that, because all previous versions of Alteryx will go exactly to the decimal place you want. It's not unspecified. So that's why we've got that. It's going to happen again, by the way. It's going to happen again on the final assignment, because I created all these assignments in Excel. But ignoring that, our number is correct. Okay, so we're good. Before we move on, though, let's go ahead and check and make sure that our data sets that we're going to be working with are also set up correctly. So basically what I mean by that is I want to make sure that our field types are all consistent, because if field types are not correct, then we're not going to be able to do the analysis we need moving forward. So on this item that you had to change your amount to float, so you had to basically two select items. You had to actually change your employee ID to integer. That was for join purposes. It will actually serve another purpose a little bit later on. We'll see why. But we also want to change our amount to float. So whatever this final file is before you did the summarization, let's go ahead and click on that. And I want you to go over down here. It says we're in data view, which actually gives you a preview of the data. I'd like you to click on where it says metadata, if it will ever show up, and click on metadata view. And basically, this is going to tell us what our field names are and what the field types are. So everything should be string except for two fields. Okay, we should have the amount field set as float, and we should have the employee ID set as integer. Yeah. Yes. So purchase date should also, you're right, should be a date as well, but that should have been revised. I apologize, I said 2 and I meant 3. Purchase date, and remember when you did that, you had to actually create a new purchase date field. So that should be listed up there too. That date field up here, we're not going to be using. We'll be using this date field though for our analysis. So that's an important point. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and go to our other files. So On this one, we want to click on the formulas creation. We do not want to click on the select tool over here because remember, when we created this file right here, this is just for the purposes of creating a hash total. So we're not going to use this file for the join. We're actually going to use this file for the join, which is basically just the import after we appended the two fields to create restaurant ID. All right. So again, we want to check and make sure that our fields are consistent. So we should have everything listed there listed as a string. Now, if you clicked on a different file, remember, you did create a new file here where you changed the restaurant number to integer. We're not going to use that particular file because that's the restaurant number is only changed to integer, so we could actually do a summarization of that field. That was just a hash total. We want to do this one, so everything should be listed as a string. And then you should have a field over here where the employee ID was changed to an integer. Remember, this is for join purposes, and we're going to leave it as an integer because we're going to use that for our join. Let's go ahead and click on that. And the only field that should be changed here should be our integer for employee ID field. All right. So just as a summarization, you should have all of your employee ID fields in both files. They should be listed as integers. Okay. And then you should have your amount field listed as float and your purchase date. You should have a new field for that because you had to actually convert the date field. That was the convert date field operation. And that is going to be as a, oops, sorry, got the wrong file. That's going to be listed as a date here. Everybody consistent on that? Feeling pretty good? All right. So now we're going to get into some things that were alluded to. And I was looking at some people's workflows, and a lot of people were already trying to preempt me and doing some joins. We're officially not doing joins until today. Okay. And some people had questioned me about that. It's like, it mentions joins in there. Yes, we're getting ready to do the joins. Basically, for our analysis, we want to have a combined file with all of our data. So we're going to start with our transaction data, and we're going to move from there. Now, there's a few ways that we can go about this. So let's scroll down to the purple files. You'll notice there's the join fields. There's actually join and join multiple, okay? Now, we're going to use the join, and we're going to do it twice. And the question comes up, why are we using that? First of all, I've not worked with join multiple much, so I'm not comfortable using it. But more importantly, in order to join multiple, we have to have a common field amongst all three data sets. And that's not going to work for our particular analysis, is that we do have foreign keys for our purchase information that we can use as joins, but they're different foreign keys for the two files. So that's why we're going to do two joins. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to go ahead and just drag the join out here and just put it as somewhere up here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set our connections manually. So I want to make my left connection. I want to make that my purchase ID file. So this last purchase file, we're going to go ahead and set that as our left anchor. Now, in order to join, we have to have two data sets. So what are we going to do for our two data sets? It honestly doesn't matter which order you go in, but personally, I just decided to use the employee file. So I'm going to drag my employee file that I was using over as my right anchor. All right, so now we're setting up our join, and we're going to join by specific columns. That's basically what we're going to do for all of our analysis. It does allow you to join by record position, which can be useful in some ancillary situations, but generally not as important or prominent. So again, we're going to be joining according to employee information. So we want to start with employee ID as our first join. So let's go ahead and go to employee ID. And as you select that in your left column, it should automatically pick that up in your right column. In other words, it's saying, I recognize that there's an employee ID field here, and there's also an employee ID field in the file that we joined with. I'm going to zoom this in so it's a little bit easier to read. So zoom that out, I guess. All right. So that's going to be our join. Let's also do a couple of cleanup steps as we're doing this. All right. So you'll notice that we've got two employee ID fields. We got one in our purchase data, and we've also got one in our employee data. We don't need two employee ID fields. So go ahead and click the checkbox next to the employee ID field that says duplicate on it. Also, just as a cleanup point, if you notice up here, remember we created a new purchase date, so we don't need the old purchase date. So let's just go ahead and get rid of that for cleanup purposes. And then before we do anything, before we do anything else, let's go ahead and make sure we annotate. So we're going to right click, we're going to add annotation. And we're just going to say join purchases and employee files. All right, so there's our first join. And if we look, we've got three outputs. And it tells you what the outputs should look like. At least it used to tell you. I guess it doesn't tell you now. So basically, our main data information is going to be our middle join. Okay, what's going to be letter J. That's basically everything that's in both files. Okay, so if there's a record that has both an employee ID and that employee ID is recognized in both files, both the purchases file and the employee file, then it's going to put those records out. You should have 315 rows, 11 out of 11 columns. That's the middle anchor. The left anchor would basically tell us anything that's in our primary file, which is our purchase information, but is not contained in our employee information. That has 0 records in it. Okay, so all of our purchases do have a corresponding employee ID. And if we go down to right, this is just the opposite. So everything that's in employee ID that's not in purchases. So all of our employee IDs have a purchase. So that's good. That's not going to be as clean as we'd like for the next one, but for this process, we want everything to be contained as well as possible, and we do have everything is contained into both files good. So there's nothing in the left or right joins. All right. So moving on to our next step, let's go ahead and we're going to create a new join now. We're going to create our second join. So I'm just going to drag this out here, and I'm going to put it right here so I don't have any setup anchored. So now we need to actually join it. We're going to make our left join to the center join on the previous one. So our center join is going to be what is our left input here. It's going to be our start file. And this is going to be a bit of a drag, no pun intended, actually some pun intended. We're going to go all the way back over to original restaurant ID file field, or sorry, restaurant ID file, and we're going to make that our right join. Now we cannot do this as the restaurant number as integer connection, because this is a field we set up specifically for the summarization. We want to go to our original data file. We want to make sure that all of our fields are set up as string. And we're going to do the exact same process we did before. We're going to pick a field that's shared between the two files. Since it's restaurant information, it's probably going to be restaurant ID. Let's go ahead and select restaurant ID. And remember, you had to create a restaurant ID. That's why we're actually using the second file instead of the original file. You actually had to create that restaurant ID, which should automatically register. If you didn't create that restaurant ID, it's not going to pick that up, which means you didn't create the restaurant ID, which means you have to go back to the original assignment, create the restaurant ID, and then come back to this. Okay, so hopefully nobody's far behind on that. Hopefully everybody created the restaurant ID. That was part of the instructions. All right, so now we've got a join here. Let's go ahead and add our annotation. Say join all files. And you will notice that, so nothing has changed as far as our number of rows, except for now we have more columns. We've got 18 columns. Let's go ahead and do one quick thing. Let's do a little bit of cleanup. We do have a redundant field again. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, we do have a duplicate restaurant ID field. We don't need 2 restaurant ID fields, so let's just go ahead and get rid of that. So now it's going to go down to 17 columns. That's just eliminating that duplicate field. So you don't need to rerun anything. It just creates them automatically. But I do want to check one thing. Remember, we did check our left and right joins previously. Let's check those again. Let's check left. So it looks like all of our transactions did fall within restaurant IDs that were listed. What about our right? So our right here does have some fields in it. What is this saying? It's saying that it looks like that we've got some restaurants that would never have any purchases or transactions from. So apparently nobody was a fan of Barbecue or Baker's Smokehouse. Nobody was a fan of Colton's or Rosie's Northtown Cafe. Okay. So we do have restaurants that are not in the purchase ID field. Now that's important to note because that will come up a little bit later in your assignment. But for the most part, this is going to be our join field. This is where we're going to be our base file for working from. So that's good to note. So now we have a file that we can run our analysis from. And we've got 10 queries that we're going to be doing. Now, as I said in the assignment, we're going to be doing 5 of these queries together. So this first part is talking about how we actually joined everything. Now we're going to be performing queries to answer questions. This is our data analysis part. This is where we get from the ETL process, the extract, transform, and load, to actual performing the analysis. So let's go ahead. We're going to do some very simple ones, then we're going to do some more complex ones. And you may, if you're confused about this, you may want to take notes because these ones that we're going to work through in class are going to set you up for understanding what you need to do for the ones that you have to do outside of class. So first one says, have there been any purchases made by employees not located in Kirksville? All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and pull out our filter tool. And there's going to be a lot of items that are connected to this middle join here, okay? So we may have to manually create those. We can do this one pretty much straightforward. let's put this way up here because we're gonna have a lot of queries that we're gonna set up. So let's try to set these out. And these are all going to come, or I shouldn't say all. Most of these are going to come from this this center join. All right, so we're going to create a basic filter here. Now, there's a few ways we can approach this. How can we determine if something occurred in Kirksville? Well, the easiest way is we go to city and we identify the term Kirksville. Okay. Also, if we're not too concerned about whether it's specifically a city, but mostly the zip code, which would be Adair County, we could actually do it on zip code as well. So let's go ahead and say city. And again, this is basically our query needs to be for transactions that did not occur in Kirksville. So instead of saying equals here, we want to say does not equal. And we're going to type in Kirksville here. Now, it's important to note here, this actually came up when I was working through this assignment. In previous iterations of Alteryx, you had to actually specify text according to string using quotation marks. But if you look down at the filter when it creates this for you, it adds the quotation marks for you since it recognizes this is already a string field. This is a text field. So if you add the quotation marks, it's going to look specifically for something with quotation marks around it. Right? So be very careful about that. That's something that I ran into and I was completely confused why I was not picking up detail. And I realized, oh, I added my own quotation marks to have it. All right. So we can look and we got true and false. And our true and false are basically going to tell us, this is basically saying these are everything that meets the condition that we set, and these are everything that does not meet our condition. So for the false, we've got 312 rows of our 315 that say, all right, everything, 312 records, almost everything occurred in Kirksville. Or shouldn't say that, to say just anyone who's purchased or not by purchasing people not in Kirksville. But let's go ahead and take a look at our true. This is basically people who are not in Kirksville. Let's see if we can scroll over. We see somebody named Earl Salzman, which if you really want to cause Dr. Caden to shake nervously, go mention that name to her. Okay. And then Alan Davis, if you really want to cause me to shake nervously, mention that name to me. Okay. You've all heard my stories about Alan Davis. Okay. People not in Kirksville. So we got St. Louis and then Greenbow, Alabama, which I don't know where Alan is from in Alabama, so I just made it up because that's Forrest Gump. That's Greenbow, Alabama. All right, so pretty straightforward. That's an easy filter we're going to do. So let's just go ahead and reiterate that. Let's go ahead and do something like that again. So any purchases have been made from restaurants that are not approved, right? You'll notice that it's also going to use the filter tool. This was deliberate. I'm going to give you a chance to do this on your own. So you're going to basically do a similar task, but instead of identifying employees not located in Kirksville, I want you to identify purchases made from restaurants that are not approved. So I'm going to give you guys a second to do that on your own, and then we'll walk through it. See if you can figure it out. It shouldn't be too hard. You all are very, very bright. Yes.
My second join.
What is it?
Second join.
So it's well, I think the metadata is fine, but I think there's maybe an error. So go to your go to
Is your data loaded?
Stop loading. Right there. It was loading.
yeah.
About to say, loading for a while.
All right. See if you figured this really, really tough one out. Obviously, we're using our filter tool again. Okay. What are we filtering on? Status, okay? And so there's a couple ways to go about this because there's only two values for the status field. There's approved and not approved. So we could say does not equal approved, or we could just say equals. I'm not gonna put a quotation mark to go on. You're better than that. All right, status equals not approved. We don't have to actually add any annotation because that's already added for us, but we can see in the true fields, we've got 3 purchases from not approved restaurants. So let's take a look to see what they are. The tax shelter, because the owner is a difficult human being. The owner of that's Alan Davis, by the way. That's why it's then Taco Bell, food is inedible, and I will stand by that. Okay, food is inedible at Taco Bell. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and do some more tasks. All right, number 3, is anyone buying or not buying lunch frequently enough? Okay, so how do we define frequently? Let's just go ahead and say if somebody's buying fewer than 3 times, if somebody bought lunch fewer than 3 times. So how can we do that? Well, let's go to do a multi-tiered process. And so let's go ahead and pull a summarization tool or summarize tool. We're just gonna pull it out here and make our connection directly. So we're gonna again use the center join and connect those to the anchor. Now let's read what it says. It actually tells us a little bit what we're going to be doing. It says group by employee ID first, last, and city. Okay. So we're going to click on employee. Is that right? Is that employee ID? Yeah, employee ID. And then when we go to action, it's going to say add action. We're going to go group by. And technically that's sufficient, but we do want the information for the individuals. So that's where we're going to add first, last, and city. Okay. Employee first. We're also going to do that as group by. Last as group by, and this is just adding information. It's redundant information, but it's important information to have. So 4 group bys: employee ID, first, last, and city. But that's not going to be sufficient by itself. It does say that we're going to also run account by purchase ID, and then we also, just for context, want to have a sum for the amount. This is not part of the operation, the sum for the amount, but it's just good to have that field for context. The account by purchase ID, though, is really important. So purchase ID right up here. Yeah, so click on that. We're going to add count. And then amount, we're going to do sum. Now let's just go ahead before we run or before we talk about this, I just want to make sure that we understand what's happening here. So technically speaking, all we really needed was the employee ID to be grouped by and then to do run a count of transactions. And basically that will identify all transactions run by each employee. The reason that we did a group by for first and last is so we could have the names of those individuals. And I don't know why I threw city in there, just because so we could have it in case they change cities, I guess. And the sum of the amount, that's just a numeric amount to show how much people are purchasing at. This is an extraneous piece of information. So the most important ones are going to be the employee ID by count. So now we have that. Let's go ahead and add an annotation. Let's go ahead and say infrequent purchase summary. But this by itself is not sufficient. So if we click on that, it shows you the count of our summarization of everything. What did I say was our criteria for infrequent purchases? 3 or fewer? So let's go ahead and click on these ellipses next to count. And you will notice that we've got some options here that we can actually do to manipulate the data. What I'd like for you to do is I'd like you to go to filter. And it pulls up a condition here. Let's just go ahead and go less than, and then type in 3. And the reason that that has the filter symbol next to it is that once we actually hit apply, it's going to add a filter for us. So we can do the same thing by adding another tool and do a filter, or we can just shortcut it and run it through here. I don't think it matters. You can actually do less than or equal to 3, or you can do less than 3. I think at the same condition, the same count comes up because the highest that you will get for anything is 2. So we got our 2 individuals who are outside of Kirksville. Remember that? We talked about them already. And then we have apparently somebody named Stacy Caden who bought from Taco Bell one time and said, you know what? If they don't like Taco Bell, then I'm not buying again. Tell you what, ungrateful people for lunch, ungrateful people. All right, I want to skip number 4 for the time being. I want to jump down to number 5. Let's go ahead and look at duplicate purchase IDs. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and pull our summarize tool out. I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap here because I want to have space for my fourth analysis. Again, we're going to manually set our anchor because we're getting kind of clustered right there around the center join. And it tells us a little bit what we need to do. It says we're going to group by purchase ID and then run a count by purchase ID. So we're going to click on this first field and we're saying group by, and then we're going to run a count by purchase ID. So basically, we are summarizing these fields. We're summarizing one field, purchase ID, and for every purchase ID, we're going to count the number of times that purchase ID appears. Now, in a good control system, how many times should each purchase ID appear? Once, okay? So we're looking for things that do not that appear more than once. So let's go ahead and add our annotation before we do our next step. Purchase ID summary for duplicates. All right, we're going to do the same task as before. We're going to add a filter condition. So we're going to click on the ellipses next to count. And we're going to set our filter. Now, what did we say? We said we want anything that's greater than 1. So let's go ahead and set that. So let's just say greater than 1. And apply that. And it runs a new filter for us. And it should have 2 transactions in here, two IDs in here. Now, if you look at the count statistics that I gave you here, it says 4 records. But there's only 2 IDs here. So is that information correct? Yeah, because each of these has 2 transactions associated with it. So 2 times 2, 4. Okay. Going back to the remedial math back in the elementary school. Okay. Never thought you'd use it again, but there you go. There you go. All right. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to do gap detection. So remember, in a well-designed control system, we should have transaction IDs and certain IDs that are in sequence. The idea being, no pun intended, the idea being is that if you walk through and you see a gap in the sequence, then you should question, why is there a gap in the sequence? Why did that occur? And that's something for investigation purposes. So that's true for like your checkbook. I don't know if anybody uses a checkbook anymore, but if you write those paper checks have numbers on them, which those numbers are kind of they're not specific to any situation. You can actually request the starting check number when you order your checks. But the idea being is that whatever your starting check number is, say you start at number 10, then the next one's going to be 11, 12, 13, 14, so on, and you can actually track that through that. So we've got a few items in here, a few items that are in our data that we can actually track according to the IDs. This is one reason, in addition to the join, this is one reason why I wanted to run employee ID as a numeric field. Because in order to do this, we need to have these fields set as numeric. So we've already done that. Remember, I told you to convert your employee ID to a numeric field so that you could join it with the other file. That was intentional both for the join and for this task right here. Now, this is going to get a little bit wonky, so bear with me. I'm going to explain every single step, but this one's by far the most complex. The reason I do this is that in data analysis and IDEA, you remember we did this back in 417, we could do gap detection automatically in IDEA. There's just something that says gap detection that looks at records. And I wanted to see, can you replicate this in Alteryx? Yes, but it is not a simple task. It requires 3 different functions, and some of them are not immediately intuitive. So let's go ahead and start with the summarize tool. As you probably guessed, we're going to join to the, not join, we're going to pair it to our center join on the files. I'm going to drag this down a little bit further because I'm going to need some space. So what are we summarizing? Well, the first thing we're going to summarize is we're going to summarize min employee ID and max employee ID. Okay. So go to the summary, go down to employee ID. It's right here. And I want to click on minimum or min. I want to click on employee ID again and max. And you'll notice it lists out the minimum number and the maximum number. So these are a sequence of employee IDs, and the lowest one currently is 2678. The highest one is 2713. Now we should have employees along that entire range. There should not be any gaps in employee ID. This is what we're going to test. So let's go ahead and add annotation. I'm just going to say min, max, employee ID. Now here's where things get a little bit strange. We're going to pull out in the blue, we're going to pull out a tool called generate rows. This does not connect to anything. It's just going to be standalone. This is something we're going to create on our own. So let's go ahead and let's check some information. So first of all, we're just going to create a new column. We're going to say row count is going to be an integer field, which is good because we know our employee ID is an integer field. We want to say you're going to generate a series of rows with values as we specify. So our first value is going to be 2678 because this was our first employee ID. All right, it's going to start at 2678. Then what it's going to do, it's going to continue on going until it reaches, it says row count less than or equal to 2713. And if you look down at the output expression, it says row count plus 1. Now, it's a lot to absorb for having looked at this. So let's go ahead and break this down to what's happening. It's going to start at 2678. The first value that it will generate is 2678. If this value is less than 2713, it's going to create a new row that's one more than the previous. So 2679. It's going to check that condition again and keep going until it reaches 2713. So if we've done this properly, we should have a series of rows all the way to 2713, 36 rows. Which allows us now to check our data to make sure that we have matches for all of these. Yes.
Why won't it let us use generate rows? Like, is there a reason if it doesn't show up?
I don't know. 1 second. All right, sorry about that. Apparently there's two sets of tools up here. And if you start with Cloud Native, then you can't actually access any of the standard tools, and that generate rows is not part of Cloud Native, which was just kind of weird. I don't know why there's a difference there, but we've been operating with the standard tools and they didn't even realize it. All right, let's just go ahead and add an annotation real quick. Let's just say generate rows. All right, now for our final step. We're going to join for gap detection. So we're going to use our join tool. And I want to put it here, but I don't want it to get some extra summary. So I'm going to go ahead, create that connection. I don't want that connection to exist. So by the way, if you have a connection that exists, you don't have to delete the entire tool and start again. You can just go to that connection and right click and delete connection. So here's what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to go with this join, the center join right there. And then I'm going to join on my right using generate rows.
The left join?
The left side is our original join file, join all files, center join. And the right one is generate rows. I'm going to start with employee ID, and we're going to join that to our row ID field, our row count field. So remember, we created this for the purpose of matching those. So we don't need to do any manipulation here. We probably do need to add an annotation. So let's just do join for gap detection. Now, this is an interesting question. So when we do this join, if we look at the center join, we still have 315 rows. But is it the center join that we're interested in here? No, we are interested in the right join. These are records that are numbers that should have a corresponding employee ID transaction, but do not. And it looks like we have no employee ID or no transaction activity from 2697 or 2690. That's how you go through the long rigmarole of actually doing a join or gap detection through this particular process. Ask, would Dr. Barnes make us do this for the assignment? The answer is absolutely. All right. So just for context, that gives you the fundamentals of what you need to know for this. But because Truman is so impressed with your work, he's asked you to do more work for that. So you've got 5 more queries to run. Now, the good news is that I've given you checks for each of these. You should be able to match those to all these. The bad news is I have not given you the detail about how to do the analysis. You're going to have to use what you've learned from today to perform this analysis. So as before, you need to prepare screenshots for your queries and tasks and copy those into a Word document and make sure you upload that document to Brightspace. You do not need to provide the full workflows, though if you decide to, for each of your queries, you're going to provide just the screenshot of the results. Please provide an aggregate workflow at the end. So 2 options. You can provide a screenshot for each of the queries that shows your entire workflow with the result, or you can just provide one workflow capture and just put the results for each of these queries at the bottom after that. But I do need to see your numbers and see that they match what the items should be up here. Any questions? All right, well, that's it for today. See you all on Monday for cloud computing, I think.